Welcome to the deep dive. You know how we're constantly hearing about bigger and bigger large language models?
Right, the scaling race.
Exactly. Well, today we're looking at something, well, a bit different. A really fascinating twist called test time scaling, or PTS.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like this. Instead of just, giving an LLM a problem and taking its first answer back, TTS is about using more computation during the problem-solving phase, intelligently.
Yeah, using that extra compute to arrive at a better solution. It's like giving the model more time to think, maybe explore different paths before it gives you the final answer.
Precisely. And our guide for this is a recent paper. The title alone really caught my eye. Can 1B LLM surpass 405B LLM? Rethinking compute optimal test time scaling.
Yeah, that title definitely makes you stop and think. A 1 billion parameter model beating a 400 billion.
Right. It hints at something potentially huge. So our mission today is really to unpack how these TTS methods actually work.
What makes them tick, yeah. And what factors influence how well they perform. Things like, the size of the LLM doing the reasoning and how hard the problem actually is.
And then there's that really mind-bending part, the sort of David versus Goliath thing.
Hmm.
This idea that a smaller LLM, if it uses TTS smartly, can sometimes actually do better than these enormous models.
It's quite a claim.
It is. So let's dive into how they're pulling off this computational jujitsu.
Okay, so the paper mainly talks about three ways to do this test time scaling. The first one they look at is called best of n, BON for short.
Okay, best of n. What's the basic idea there? Like, the name sounds kind of simple.
It is pretty intuitive. Think of it like brainstorming. The LLM doesn't generate just one answer. It generates multiple, maybe quite different potential solutions.
Okay.
And then a separate process, usually another model, comes in to evaluate all those options and picks the one it thinks is the best.
Okay. So get a range of shots on goal and then have a ref decide which one went in. Makes sense. What's number two?
The second one is beam search. This is a bit more guided.
Guided how?
Instead of generating totally separate answers like BON with beam search, the LLM explores multiple potential solution paths step by step. At each step, it keeps, say, the top few most promising lines of reasoning active and drops the less likely ones.
Oh, interesting. So it's like exploring a maze, but you keep track of the few paths that look most promising at every junction, instead of just one.
Exactly. It's a more focused exploration, pruning away the dead ends as you go.
Right. And the third method?
The third one is called Diverse Verifier Tree Search, or DVTS. This kind of builds on beam search.
Okay.
The key idea here is diversity. It tries to explore a wider range of possibilities than standard beam search might. So instead of just one focused beam, DVTS explores multiple, somewhat independent subtrees or branches of potential solutions.
Trying to avoid getting stuck down one particular rabbit hole.
Precisely. It helps the model avoid converging too quickly on a single way of thinking, especially if that way is wrong.
So DVTS is like running a few beam searches in parallel, maybe each starting slightly differently.
Yeah,
Could be good for tricky problems.
potentially, yeah.
Now, the paper mentioned they didn't really look at some other search methods, like Monte Carlo tree search. Why skip those?
Yeah, they noted that for the kind of multi-step reasoning problems LLMs often tackle, methods like MCTS can get really computationally expensive really fast.
Ah.
The overhead of sampling lots of steps ahead just becomes, well, too inefficient compared to BON or beam search or DVTS for these tasks.
Got it. Efficiency is key here. Okay, so with all these methods, especially BON and the search ones, you're generating multiple options or steps. You need a way to decide what's good. That's where these process reward models, PRMs, come in. They're the judges.
Exactly. PRMs are the judges. They're typically smaller language models themselves, specifically trained to evaluate the quality, well, either the final answers generated or sometimes even the intermediate reasoning steps the main LLM takes during TTS.
Okay, and the study used quite a few different open source PRMs, right? Not just one judge.
That's right. They tested a whole suite of them. There was Math Shepherd PRM-7B, a couple from the RLH Flow series, like one based on Mistral 8B and another on DeepSeek 8B.
Got it.
Then the Skywork PRMs, a 1.5 billion and a 7 billion parameter version, and also the Quen 2.5 Math PRMs, again, a 7B and a much bigger 72B version.
Wow, quite the panel of judges.
Yeah.
And they highlighted the Quen 2.5 Math PRM72B as being particularly strong for math problems.
Yeah, the paper suggests, based on existing benchmarks, that it's currently seen as sort of the top open source judge for evaluating mathematical reasoning, likely trained on a ton of high-quality math data.
A specialist judge. Got it.
Ah.
Now, for best of n, where you have those multiple final answers, how does the PRM actually score them? The paper mentioned PRM min, PRM last, PRM FD.
Right. So if the PRM is looking at a whole reasoning chain, PRM in takes the lowest score given at any step in that chain.
Pessimistic judge.
Kind of, yeah. PRM last only cares about the score of the very final output or step.
Okay.
And PRM G, as the name suggests, averages the scores across all the steps the PRM evaluated.
All right, those are scoring methods. Then they also mentioned voting methods for bond, majority vote, PRM max, and PRM vote. How do those work to pick the winner?
Okay, so majority vote is simple. It just picks the answer that shows up most often among all the generated candidates.
Yeah.
No PRM needed there, actually.
Ah, okay, pure popularity contest.
Right. Then PRM Max uses the PRM scores. It just selects the single candidate answer that got the absolute highest score from the PRM.
Highest rated wins.
Yep. And PRM vote is a bit more nuanced. It first groups identical answers together. Then for each unique answer, it sums up the PRM scores from all the times that answer appeared. The unique answer with the highest total score wins.
Interesting. So PRM vote sort of combines the PRM's quality assessment with how consistently that answer was generated.
Exactly. It rewards answers that are both high quality according to the PRM and generated multiple times.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift to some of the big findings now. One key concept was reward-aware, compute-optimal TTS. What's the core idea there?
So the compute optimal part is about finding that sweet spot using just the right amount of computation for a given problem to maximize performance. Not too little, not too much.
Right.
The reward-aware part adds a crucial layer. It says this optimal compute strategy isn't fixed. It needs to actively consider how the PRM's reward signals influence the whole TTS process.
Ah, so the judge isn't just sitting at the end scoring. The way it scores actually shapes how the reasoner explores, especially with methods like beam search.
Precisely. The PRM's preferences actively guide the search. They gave a really clear example using beam search with the same LLM, Llama 3.1 8B instruct, but swapping out the PRM.
Okay.
They used RLH Flow PRM Mistral 8B and RLH Flow PRM DeepSeek 8B. And even though the base LLM was identical, the different PRMs led to quite different generation processes and, importantly, different final outcomes.
Really? How did they differ?
Well, they observed that the Mistral-based PRM seemed to favor shorter responses. It tended to give higher scores for brevity, which in some cases actually pushed the model towards answers that were short, maybe looked plausible, but were ultimately incorrect. The DeepSeek-based PRM, on the other hand, seemed happier with longer, more detailed outputs. And in the examples they showed, this tendency often led the model down a path that resulted in a correct answer, even though it took more computational steps.
Wow. So the judge's bias in this case towards length can really steer the ship, for better or worse.
Absolutely. It shows the tight coupling between the reasoner and the evaluator.
Okay, super interesting. Another thing they looked at was problem difficulty. How did they figure out if a problem was easy, medium, or hard?
Yeah, they took a neat approach here. Instead of defining difficulty based on how, say, the average LLM does, because models vary so much, they used absolute thresholds based on the pass at 1 accuracy. That's just how often a model gets it right on the first try.
Okay, fixed benchmarks.
Right. So easy problems were ones where models generally got 50-100% pass at 1, medium was 10-50%, and hard was anything below 10% pass at 1 accuracy.
Makes sense. Avoids the easy for GPT-4 is hard for a tiny model issue. Gives a more objective measure. So how did the best TTS method change depending on this difficulty level and the size of the main LLM?
They found some pretty clear patterns for the smaller models, like under 7 billion parameters.
Yeah.
Best of N tended to be better for the easy problems, but for the harder ones, beam search seemed more effective for these smaller models.
Okay, bond for easy, search for hard for the little guys. What about medium models?
For the medium-sized ones, say 7B to 32B parameters, DBTS, that diverse search, actually performed well on both easy and medium problems. But again, for the really hard stuff, beam search was still preferred.
Interesting. DVTS finding a niche there. And the
Yeah.
big one, the 72B model.
For the largest model they tested, the 72B best of N actually came out on top across all difficulty levels, easy, medium, and hard.
Huh. So it seems like once a model gets powerful enough, just generating lots of independent tries and picking the best, bond becomes the most robust strategy, regardless of difficulty.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Smaller models maybe benefit more from the step-by-step guidance of search on tough problems, but bigger models might just need more shots on goal.
Fascinating trade-offs.
Yeah.
Now, what about these PRMs, the judges? How well do they generalize? Like,
Right.
does a good PRM for one LLM work well for others?
That was a really important finding. The answer seems to be Not really.
Hmm.
DRMs often struggle to generalize effectively across different main LLMs, they call them policy models, and also across different types of tasks.
So you can't just grab any off-the-shelf PRM and expect it to work well with your specific LLM.
Probably not. The paper showed examples, I think referring to figures 4 and 5 in the results, where a specific PRM might give a huge performance boost with TTS for one LLM, like Llama 3.18b.
Yeah.
But when paired with a different LLM, like Quen 2.57b, that same PRM might do very little, or even make things worse, even with lots of computation.
Wow. So the choice of judge is really critical and seems highly dependent on the specific reasoner it's evaluating.
Exactly. The best TTS approach isn't just about the method, bond, beam search, etc. It's strongly tied to the specific PRM you're using with that specific policy model.
We also sort of touched on this earlier, but can you elaborate more on how the size of the main LLM itself, the policy model, influences which TTS strategy is best?
Yeah, it connects back to those difficulty findings. For the smaller models, as we said, search-based methods like beam search and DVTS generally seem to outperform best of N.
Right.
The thinking is that these less powerful models benefit more from the step-by-step verification and guidance that search provides. They need that extra hand-holding, you could say, to make sure their reasoning stays on track.
They need the structure.
Precisely. Whereas the larger models, which have stronger reasoning capabilities baked in already, well, they don't seem to rely as much on that fine-grained step-by-step checking.
Okay.
For them, generating multiple diverse, complete attempts using best of N, and then letting a strong PRM pick the best final answer seems to be a more efficient way to leverage their power.
That makes intuitive sense. If you're already a strong reasoner, maybe you just need a few independent attempts rather than someone checking every single step. Now, the paper also dug into some specific biases they found in these PRM judges. What kind of issues did they uncover?
Yeah, they found some recurring problems. One significant bias was towards response length.
We saw that with the Mistral versus DeepSeek example.
Exactly. Some PRMs might just be inherently biased, probably from their training data, to prefer shorter answers, while others prefer longer ones, sometimes irrespective of correctness. They showed data, I think it was in Table 1 and Figure 12, comparing the training data for those Mistral and DeepSeek PRMs, showing differences in average response lengths.
So the data used to train the judge shapes his preferences. Makes sense. What else?
Another bias was sensitivity to the voting methods used in Best of N. Remember PRM Max versus PRM Vote?
Yeah.
They found, for example, that one PRM, Skywork PRM 7B, performed much better with PRM Vote, the method that sums scores for identical answers, compared to just taking the single max score with PRM Max. But another PRM, Quen 2.5 Math PRM 7B, was much less sensitive to that choice. They suggested this might be because the Quen PRMs used an extra step involving LLM as a judge during their training, potentially making them more robust or consistent.
So even how we tally the judge's scores can interact with the judge's inherent biases. It's complex. Did they show specific examples of PRMs getting things wrong?
Oh, yeah. They had some great case studies highlighting four main categories of issues. The first was overcriticism,
Meaning?
meaning the PRM assigns unfairly low scores to reasoning steps that are actually perfectly correct. They had an example simplifying the square root of 242, where the PRM dinged correct intermediate algebraic steps.
Ouch. That could kill a perfectly good solution path.
Absolutely. Then the flip side was error neglect.
Letting mistakes slide.
Yep. The PRM gives high scores even when there's a clear, sometimes basic, error in the reasoning. They showed a geometry problem using the sine rule where the PRM completely missed a fundamental mistake.
Also bad. Leads you to trust wrong answers. What were the other two issues?
One was error localization bias. This is subtle. The PRM might correctly identify that something is wrong in a reasoning chain, but it assigns the low score to a correct step before the actual error, rather than pinpointing the mistake itself.
Huh. Like blaming the setup instead of the faulty calculation later on.
Kind of, yeah. They had a geometry example for this too.
Yeah.
And the last one was scoring bias, which is related to the length issue, but maybe broader. The PRM showing sensitivity to things like token length or phrasing, even when comparing two steps that are logically equivalent and correct.
Wow. Okay, so these PRMs, while useful, are definitely not perfect judges. They have their own quirks and blind spots.
For sure. It really underscores the need for a better PRMs or maybe different evaluation methods altogether.
Okay, now let's get to the headline result, the part the title screamed about. Smaller LLMs beating the giants. What did they actually find there?
This is really the kicker. The study provided pretty compelling evidence that smaller policy models, when you combine them with these compute optimal TTS strategies, They really can outperform much, much larger models,
including the big names.
including some of the biggest names out there, yeah. They showed results on tough benchmark data sets like Math 500 and AME24, where smaller models using TTS surpassed models like GPT-4o, various Llama 3.1 models, including the 70B and even the massive 405B parameter versions, and others.
That's genuinely staggering. Can you give a concrete example they highlighted?
Yes. The standout example was their Llama 3.2 3B instruct model, so only 3 billion parameters, using their optimized TTS approach with a strong PRM.
Yeah.
It achieved better accuracy on these challenging math reasoning tasks than both the Llama 3.1 405B instruct model that's over 100 times larger and GPT-4o.
Okay, wait. A 3 billion parameter model beating a 405 billion parameter model and GPT-4o on hard math problems. That feels like it rewrites the rules.
It certainly challenges the bigger is always better mantra.
How do the computational costs compare? I mean, TTS uses more computation at test time, right?
Yeah.
But compared to just running the giant model once.
Right. That's the crucial comparison. The paper looked at the total compute, measured in FLOPS, floating point operations, and what they found was that the smaller model using TTS could achieve that superior performance using only a tiny fraction of the total FLOPS compared to running the giant model just once without TTS.
A fraction? Like how much less?
The reductions were often huge. They reported factors of 100x to even 1000x fewer total FLOPS in some comparisons.
1,000 times less compute for potentially better results. That's economically transformative if it holds up.
It has massive implications for efficiency and accessibility, absolutely.
So how does this TTS approach stack up against more standard techniques people use, like chain of thought prompting,
Sure.
or just generating multiple answers and taking the most common one?
They did those comparisons too. Compute optimal TTS showed significant gains over basic chain of thought, or COT. They reported accuracy improvements of up to, I think, 154% over standard COT on some tasks.
Wow.
And compared to simple majority voting, just generating multiple answers and picking the most frequent, TTS was way more efficient. For one of the smaller models, Llama 3.21b, they found TTS could be up to 256 times more compute efficient than majority voting to reach a similar performance level.
Huge wins in both accuracy over QT and efficiency over simple voting. But didn't the paper also say the benefit of TTS decreases as the main LLM gets bigger?
Yes, that's an important nuance. It goes back to what we discussed earlier. The smaller models, the ones with weaker baseline reasoning, seem to get the biggest relative boost from the extra scaffolding and verification that TTS provides.
All right.
As the underlying model gets larger and inherently more capable, the additional gain you get from applying TTS on top becomes smaller. They're already closer to the ceiling performance, perhaps.
The weaker students benefit most from the extra help. Makes sense. Okay, one last comparison. What about against some of the really sophisticated methods specifically designed for complex reasoning, like these long COTI approaches, things like star math or simpler RL?
Yeah, they put TTS up against several of those state-of-the-art long code-based methods. And interestingly, their TTS approach, particularly using the Quen 2.57b instruct model with a good PRM,
Yes.
it actually outperformed a number of these specialized long code methods on both the Math 500 and the harder AME24 benchmarks.
Really? That's impressive, beating methods specifically tuned for this stuff.
It is quite impressive. However, there was a caveat. They did note that TTS might still lag behind techniques that involve distilling knowledge from truly enormous proprietary reasoning models.
So if you can train a smaller model by learning directly from the outputs or reasoning steps of something like a hypothetical GPT-5 or an even larger internal model, that might still be better.
Potentially, yeah. Especially for the absolute hardest problems like those in AME24, it seems the kind of teaching from a vastly superior model still holds an edge, which makes sense. TTS is about making a model reason better with its own capabilities, while distillation is about transferring capabilities from a stronger model.
Got it. So TTS is a powerful self-improvement technique, but maybe not the absolute ceiling compared to learning from a much larger teacher model.
That seems like a fair summary of their findings, yeah.
Well, this has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive into test time scaling. If we had to boil it all down, what's the main takeaway message for listeners?
I think the big picture is that compute optimal test time scaling is a genuinely powerful technique. It really demonstrates that just scaling up model size isn't the only path forward. by being smarter about how we use computation during inference.
That test time.
Right, at test time.
Yeah.
We can significantly boost the reasoning abilities of LLMs. And crucially, this can allow smaller, much more efficient models to punch way above their weight, sometimes even outperforming the giants.
And it's clearly not simple. It's not just turn on TTS. You really have to think about the specific TTS method, the problem's difficulty, the characteristics of your main LLM, and critically, the behavior and potential biases of the PRM you're using as the judge.
Absolutely. It's a system approach. And the research highlights that this is still very much an active area. There's lots of room for improvement, developing better, less biased PRMs, extending these methods to tasks beyond math, like coding or general reasoning, and finding even smarter ways to supervise and guide these smaller models.
It really feels like we're just scratching the surface of making inference itself more intelligent, not just the model training.
I completely agree. There's so much potential there.
Okay, well, that gives us a huge amount to chew on. To leave our listeners with a final thought, given these findings, what are the implications? If smarter inference strategies with smaller models can genuinely compete with or even beat massive models, could this signal a shift? Might we see more focus on developing these efficient inference techniques, perhaps leveraging ideas like weak-to-strong supervision to really enhance smaller models, instead of just continuing the relentless march towards ever larger parameter counts? It certainly makes you wonder if a more sustainable, accessible, and maybe even ultimately more effective path for AI progress lies in smarter computation, not just bigger models. Lots to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.